welcome to day 2 of GGSA's, or the Geography Graduate Student Association's Climate Talks, titled Indigenous Wisdom and Perspectives on Colonial and Industrial-Induced Climate Change. This is an event sponsored by SDSU through the Student Success Fee Grant. We do want to thank all of you who are taking your time to join this theme event. We think this is a special and necessary discussion that will challenge how we think and approach climate topics and climate science. And we're excited to hear from 2 more panelists today, Ora and James. I know some of you might have logged in yesterday for day 1 and have heard some of our introductions before. But for those of you who were not here last night, we want to direct you to our main webpage with more detailed information about the talk, about our moderators and panelists. We're also sharing a link to our first climate talk from last year, which focused on bringing together climate scientists, educators, and activists to discuss a variety of climate topics. We're also sharing GGSA's email in case you have any other questions or comments for us. So we're sharing all of those links and the email in the chat so you can take a look at those. And then with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with day 2. So my name is Ora Monteverde. I am a PhD student in the Geography Department at SDSU, and I'm the president of GGSA, and I'll be the host for tonight. I also have my co-host, Selena Ibarra, who will be monitoring the chat. Hey, Selena, monitoring the chat and kind of documenting your questions as they come in. So thank you, Selena, for helping out with day 2. And again, this is day 2 of 3 days of panel discussions with the purpose to first provide a forum for Indigenous insights, concerns, and lessons to challenge blind spots, errors, and exclusions of Western climate science. And second, to present SDSU students, faculty, staff, alumni, and the wider public with opportunities to become worthy to responding to these challenges. We are recording these events, and we will share them on a web-based application and through a post-event newsletter. So this will allow for conversations to continue even after this event ends. We will share this with all of the participants after the final climate talk tomorrow. So the structure of today's discussion will be formatted like yesterday. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement statement, and then each panelist will share their perspectives, practices, and wisdom, and associated challenges Indigenous communities may be facing related to colonial and industrial-induced climate change. And then we'll open for discussion between the moderator and the panelists and end with questions from the audience. So make sure to type your questions or comments in the chat at any time. You don't have to wait until the end to post a question. So now I am very honored to introduce our moderators and panelists for today's discussion. So again, our moderators for this 3-day event are Shasta Gaughen and Giorgio Curti. Shasta is the Environmental Director and the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Paula Band of Mission Indians and has worked there since 2005, where she established Paula's Tribal Historic Preservation Office. She received her PhD in anthropology from the University of New Mexico, has worked as an adjunct professor for CSU San Marcos, is chair of the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation, secretary of the board for the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition, lead of the Tribal Working Group for the Climate Science Alliance, and a member of the Institute of Tribal Environmental Professionals Climate Change Advisory Committee. So thanks, Shasta, for being here for day 2. Yeah, your insights in these topics is super appreciated. So thank you again for being here. And then we also have Giorgio. Giorgio is a socio-cultural geographer, geoethnographer, and critical ethnographer who works at the intersections of cultural and natural resources laws, traditional and local knowledges and sciences, and the collaborative development and implementation of land and water stewardship and management strategies, guided and defined by Indigenous and traditional communities and associated human-environment relationships and worldview and value systems. He received his PhD from SDSU and UCSB and co-founded Cultural Geographics Geographic Consulting in 2016. And he also serves as an adjunct professor and sometimes lecturer at SDSU and as a research associate with the SDSU Young People's Environments, Society, and Space Research Center. So thanks again, Giorgio, for being here all 3 days. And we are also joined by two amazing panelists, Dr. Ora Marek-Martinez and James Rattling. And I know that they'll each expand on their backgrounds, but we want to welcome Ora and James. Ora is the director of the Native American Cultural Center and an assistant professor of anthropology for Northern Arizona University. She supports and ensures the success of Northern Arizona University Native American and Indigenous students through indigenized programming and services. So welcome, Ora. Thank you for taking your time to be here tonight. And James, who is a research associate at the University of Colorado Boulder and is a co-PI for the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. He specializes in developing programs that utilize the interface between Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge and Western science. So thank you, James, for joining us. And in our audience, we also have panelists from our other days. We have Michael Derglo, who will be a panelist tomorrow. We have Edward Wimatiwa, who was a panelist last night, Anne Valentino, who was also a panelist last night, and Adam Elspikoff, who will be a panelist tomorrow. So thank you, Edward, Michael, Adam, and Valentino for also joining us today. And we were blessed last night to begin these climate talks with an opening prayer from Edward. So Edward, thank you again for opening our climate talks and blessing us with that prayer. And we also want to open with a land acknowledgement statement and frame the purpose of these discussions. So we as students have asked Giorgio to lead us in these statements. He's been working closely in these topics, and he did read a full land acknowledgement yesterday, which is actually on our main webpage, and we shared that link in the chat. So if you want to read that full land acknowledgement, you can go ahead and check out our main webpage. But today he will be sharing an abridged statement. And we also want to clarify that GGSA did reach out to the Kumeyaay community, but because of the timing and the structure of the talks, unfortunately, none were able to take part. And so with that, I will give the floor to Giorgio, and then I will let Shasta and Giorgio take over the rest of this discussions for tonight. So Giorgio.
Thank you, Corey. So again, I apologize. I'm reading this, so you're going to have to look at my not so attractive face staring at the screen. Since time immemorial, the Kumeyaay people, Ipai to the north, Tipai to the south, Kamia to the inland, and all those who have used and continue to use the self-identifier Gaughen, whether by active choice or colonial imposition, have been part of the lands and waters we often call today San Diego County. These lands and waters have nourished, healed, protected, and been intimate and indelible parts of the familial and social of Kumeyaay for many, many generations, and continue to be today. With, in, of, and through these lands and waters, Kumeyaay have practiced familial and social relationships of stewardship, care, balance, and harmony, relational practices that live and support life always for the people. What I have been taught by the Kumeyaay people with and for whom I work is that the depth and weight of what it means for an act, a thought, a song, a prayer, a method, an offering, an action, a practice to be for the people can only truly be glimpsed and loosely grasped when notions of the person and concepts of the social are opened up to relations and capacities that exist far before and far beyond dominant and dominating human-centric errors and blinders. As members of the San Diego State University community and residents of the city and county of San Diego, it is imperative that those of us who are not indigenous to these lands and waters recognize that we are contributing to a colonial settler institution, that we ourselves are settlers in indigenous Kumeyaay lands, and that more often than not, we are directly implicated in promulgating, promoting, and perpetuating dominant and dominating errors and blinders, whether passively or actively. We must both acknowledge this legacy and ongoing presence of coloniality and take ownership of the fact that each one of us has a deep obligation and weighted responsibility to actively and productively work towards restorative, geographical, historical, political, cognitive, legal, and social justice with and for Kumeyaay people, wherever, whenever, and however they deem appropriate. It is thus essential that the language of land acknowledgement, such as this one, not be confused for the production of spaces for equitable and corrective action, or those of representational recognition mistaken for productive systemic change. If acknowledgments are to be meaningful, they must be continually generative. Therefore, so too must they be accompanied by actionable institutional respect and operational structural inclusion in practice, policy, perspective, and return of the knowledge and political sovereignty of Kumeyaay people, and indeed all Native peoples, to all ancestral and familial lands and waters. In yesterday's opening day climate talks, Edward Wimatiwa of the Pueblo of Zuni and Tino Villaluz of the Swinomish Indian tribal community taught us that for us to begin to become worthy to the challenges created by and continually recreating intensive movements of colonial and industrial-induced climate change, we must be attentive to how seemingly well-meaning intentions and decisions, such as those defining and directing sustainability or climate science, may still be destructive to local geographies and lifeways when the lessons, insights, perspectives, and wisdoms of Native sciences and knowledge systems are neglected. Both Edward and Tino underscored true inclusion and collaboration is required to create a balance among and between Native communities and Indigenous sciences and the dominant and dominating world of Western academia and science. Currently, the university industrial complex is often the perverse and monstrous breeding ground of the epistemological errors, discounting, disenfranchising, and marginalizing Indigenous wisdom and knowledge, while it promulgates the values and drives the very processes of colonial and industrial-induced climate change. We thus must take to heart and mind, as Tino so eloquently put it yesterday, the fact that the university system is both the disease but also the cure. It is each of our responsibilities to learn from the wisdom and perspectives that were so graciously shared by Edward and Tino yesterday, and that will be so graciously shared by Dr. Ora Marek-Martinez and James Rattling Leaf today, to work together for that cure in order for there to be, as both pasts and futures, health, balance, and well-being for the people. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my old friend who I've learned so much from, Dr. Ora Marek-Martinez.
Well, Kasia, yeah, thank you, Giorgio. I really appreciate the words and just the insights that you've shared with us. So let me see if I can get this going here. All right. Okay. I believe everyone can see that. Situated. Wonderful. All right. So, Yat'e Tatsala, good afternoon. I'd like to start by sending my gratitude to Corey Monteverde, Dr. Giorgio Curti, and the SDSU Geography Graduate Student Association for inviting me to be a part of the second annual Climate Talks. In my talk today, I'll be discussing my experience as the former Navajo Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the impacts of extractive industries on the cultural landscape that the Diné or Navajo called Diné-Pekea are our Navajo homelands. I'll discuss my own journey in archaeology and the impact of colonization on tribal histories and what this has resulted in on Navajo lands. And I'm going to include some examples from the Navajo Nation that I went through in my time there as a TIPO. And so really looking at some of these practices that are in relation to extractive industries and settler colonial-based land management practices and regulations. But I also want to end on a positive note and share some insights from the work that I've completed, really in regards to indigenization of my own discipline of archaeology and how we've used that to address climate change. Let's see, okay. And so I just also, I again appreciate the land acknowledgement statement. And so I'd like to begin with the NAU, Northern Arizona University land acknowledgement that recognizes the 13 tribes that hold this place that we now know as Flagstaff in their hearts, minds, and prayers. And so Northern Arizona University sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homelands that are sacred to Native Americans throughout the region. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. And so in my own Navajo language, this mountain is known as Dok'oslin, or the place where the snow never melts. This mountain is also known as the Abalone Shell Mountain, but it's also our western boundary marker of our Dnepikeya. And so and you can see in my background the mountain range here. I don't know if you can see there. But this mountain is the mother of our four sacred mountains, but it's associated with learning. And so the lands that we currently know as Flagstaff are a fitting place for Northern Arizona University, where we are continually learning. And so just want to start with that in recognition of the lens that I am on right now. And in the photo, you'll see the campus of Northern Arizona University with the Native American Cultural Center where I work. And that is what I like to refer to as the heart of campus. And so, land acknowledgements are some of the initial steps of decolonization of institutions like mine, like NAU. They're also a recognition of the painful histories that are associated with the unceded Aboriginal territories and homelands of Indigenous peoples that our institutions sit upon. And so, on the other hand, there are expectations from Indigenous communities that land acknowledgements are really just those first steps in the process of decolonization, and that those acknowledgements really need to have direct and indirect strategies for decolonizing institutions that include but aren't limited to indigenizing spaces for Indigenous communities. And so when we think about these sorts of acknowledgements, I think it's important for us to really think about who they are benefiting and what those actions are that are a result of the land acknowledgement. And so I'm happy that your institution does have a land acknowledgement. There have been many institutions that I've provided talks to where they actually do not have a land acknowledgement. And so I guess that's how we do things in the West. But in honor of my own ancestors, I'd like to introduce myself to you in my language, Navajo language. And so it's appropriate to introduce yourself to others in a cultural way when you are speaking from the heart. And in sharing the information that I'll be sharing with you today, I feel it's appropriate to bring my real self to you in this lecture today, or in this talk. B. Medicine, who is one of the first female Indigenous anthropologists, encouraged other Indigenous anthropologists to bring their real selves to the discipline and to academia, really as a way to share, to educate, and to enrich the academy. And so it's with that in mind that I want to share my own cultural introduction with you. And when I meet other Indigenous peoples, the information that I share helps to provide the necessary context for establishing relationality. And for me, it's a way that I am able to honor the connections that we hold and share, and maintain with not only the landscape, but with other people. And so, yat eshe Ora Marek-Martinez yinishe, zitlatni nishle, do nimi pui patise bashishchin, do kis ani e dashache, do belagana e dashanele, agot ego e asani nishle. Lapwe Idaho den yisi na shato kinfanite na shago. And so, for those of you who don't speak Navajo, I just introduced who I am, how I'm known in my community, but also I introduced all of the people in my family. And so as Navajos being matrilineal, our first clan is our mother's clan. And so that clan never changes, right? That's who we are. And so to my people, I am Mountain Cove clan, but I was born for the Nez Perce people. My father was Nez Perce from northern Idaho, which is where I actually grew up in Lapwai, Idaho. My maternal grandfather was Hopi. He was Sun Clan from Oribe. And my paternal grandfather was actually white. He was Bohemian and Italian. Bohemian is where my last name Merritt comes from. And because of that, I am a Navajo woman, so my pronouns are she, her, hers. Originally, I grew up in Lapwai, Idaho, and so you see a map here on this page. And the end of where it says reservation is literally where I grew up in Lapwai, Idaho. And the larger sort of purple map there are our traditional lands where we've occupied since time immemorial. On the other hand, on the other side, you'll see a map of the Navajo Nation there. And the little cutout there is actually Hopi Nation. And so my family is originally from the area, and I don't think I have a pointer on this, but that is southeast of the very corner of the Hopi Nation. But most of my family lives outside of Fruitland, Kirtland in New Mexico, which is outside of Farmington, New Mexico. And so that's where the majority of my family is. But I live here in Flagstaff now with my family. And so that's who I am. So as part of my story in who I am now as an Indigenous archaeologist, I learned from my father. He was a very culturally grounded man in Nez Perce culture and Nimiipuu culture. And so I grew up on the reservation in Lapwai, but my father was very adamant about my siblings and I knowing who we were, knowing and understanding our culture and our language, but also what our role was as Nimiipuu Ayets, or as Nez Perce women. And so he raised my siblings and I with ancestral and cultural knowledge that we developed through trips to different cultural places, through ceremony, through hunting, fishing, gathering. And so these were things that my father was taught and that was passed down from his family. And so in a way, it was really these sort of processes of survivance, as Gerald Visner describes it, right? This sort of ability of Indigenous peoples to survive and really thrive in the face of colonization and of discrimination, but also being able to move beyond these sort of stereotypes of us being victims or the ever disappearing Indian, right? And really, it's this ability to engage in the perpetuation of our ancestral and our cultural knowledges and practices. And so basically what that meant is that I grew up learning about the ways that my people and other Indigenous people survived, but I was also able to witness and experience the love, the nurturing, and the care that Indigenous people surround themselves with. And really that same kind of care, respect, and reciprocity that they approach their lands with in stewarding those lands. And so because of that, I approach the work that I do from my tamina, or my heart. And so I speak in a way, I think from a way, and everything is from my heart. And from Nez Perce culture, we are taught that in order to ensure that I'm doing things in a good way, or to ensure that what I'm doing is beneficial for our people, it has to come from our heart. And so our tamina, our heart, leads the way for us. And so I first understood what my calling was to protect our cultural lens and to protect our practices and to ensure the perpetuation of these knowledges when I was about 10 years old. And so in the center photo there is a place called Buffalo Eddy, and it's a petroglyph site, and it is a site that is associated with my father's band of Nez Perce people. And so we would go to this site every summer. And my dad, he was able to tell us stories that his mother, his aunties, and his uncles taught him about these stories from our ancestors. And so every summer we would go there and he would tell us these stories and share these practices with us. And when I was 10 years old, we went to this site, and it was a little bit precarious to get to. You sort of had to shimmy on this cliff that was overlooking the river. So if you fell in the river. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little scary. So, but you sort of all had to follow in a line. And so my dad was first, and then it was me, and then my siblings and my cousins. And it was sort of a treat because we'd go and listen to the stories. And then we all got to jump off the cliff into 15 feet down into the water. So it was a lot of fun for us. But I remember he stopped right in front of us and we all kind of bumped into each other. And he didn't say anything. He didn't turn around. And, that was it was strange. It was just strange behavior for him. So he finally turned around and looked at me, and he was crying. And that was one of the first times that I had ever seen my father cry. And when he moved out of the way, this is what we saw, this fragmented panel. And so when we first saw it, it was, you could see where the chainsaw marks and the cuts were in because somebody had literally come in and cut it out. And so, we were in shock. And I remember asking my father, what happened? Why would somebody do this? Well, where are they? And just, completely confused and just, flabbergasted. I had no idea that this could even happen. And so my dad was quiet for a really long time. And then finally he said that it's either in a museum or it's in someone's backyard. And as a 10-year-old child, I could not for the life of me understand what that even meant. And so that just incurred, just created all of these questions that I had for my dad. And, it was like, well, why would it be in a museum? What do you mean it's in a museum? Why would it be in somebody's backyard? And so he had to take the time to explain to me all of these things that had happened to our people since we had been in contact with archaeologists and anthropologists, and that there had been a history of looting and theft of our ancestors, of our belongings, of these kinds of communal places, this cultural patrimony, right? And it was something that changed my life. And so it was at that time that I told my father that I want to do whatever it is that we have to do to make sure that this never happens again on our homelands. And so, my father just kind of looked down at me and told me, okay, I'll teach you what I know. And so that was the beginning of my own journey with my father, of learning these protocols of how we take care of the land and how we're protectors and how we are the ones in this generation to ensure that these kinds of things stop and that we have our culture, our practices, and our life ways intact, and that we share that for the next generation. And so I didn't actually know that that meant that I would become an archaeologist. I just thought that I'd be, some kind of protector and, living on my own homelands. And so here I am living in northern Arizona as a professor and as someone who supports Indigenous students. And so, in my life, my vision of who I am has changed, and it's changed with these different experiences, and it's been where I've been called. And so I have a very strong inclination that the work that I've done, I was meant to do that work because of the cultural and family responsibilities that I was taught and that I learned. And in addition to the cultural education that I gained through this time. And so I knew that this was something I wanted to do. I wanted to protect our homelands. I wanted to protect our culture. But then I also knew that as an Indigenous woman, as a mother, an auntie, a sister, that I was a part of what I should do, of what I wanted to do, was to serve my people. And so this was a role that I had been prepared for in many different ways. And so becoming an archaeologist, an Indigenous archaeologist, was something that came very naturally to me. And so growing up, I was taught about what it meant to be an or an Aya, a woman, in caring for our lands and our culture. And so that was something that was taught to me by all of the women in my life, my family, my mother, my aunties, but also the elders in my community, the other aunties that were related through clan or band, right? Just these women who were a part of my community. And so I learned that that I needed to be a strong leader and that being a woman was also carrying our people and being a backbone of our people and for our culture. And so part of that meant learning to care for, to nurture, and to protect our people, our relatives, and our lands, right? And so it was also about perpetuating our culture, our knowledge, and our life worlds for the next 7 generations. And so for me, that meant, again, really leaning into these roles as an auntie, but also as a mother. And it was something that I didn't understand how important our culture was until I had my children. And so there's a photo of myself with my oldest, and I have twins there. And so they keep me motivated. They also keep me extremely busy. Um, and in the photo in the middle, that is my father's family. And so those are the people who taught me what it means to be in relationship with our environment, with our world, with the relatives around us. And so all of these things I learned about what it means to do good archaeology was really what it meant to be a good relative, to be a good citizen as part of our community. And so that's what I uphold in the work that I do as an archaeologist. Um, and so, you know, all of these different pieces of me, all of these dimensions have led to me becoming and being an Indigenous archaeologist. And those relationships that have supported me through that time have given me that kind of firsthand experience to be able to replicate Indigenous kinship systems, or as we say in Navajo, amongst my different colleagues, and for the students that I train and that are a part of our, the undergrad and grad programs that come into the center. And so those support systems that I built at home and within academia have been critical to not only my success, but of the work that we do in community. And so, one of those critical supporters for me has been my advisor and academic mother, Dr. Margaret Conkey, who's seen in that bottom left-hand corner photo. And Dr. Conkey, or Meg, she modeled a nurturing but also brutally honest relationship, a caring and supportive reciprocal mentoring relationship. But she really helped this res girl learn about archaeology and how archaeology can help reveal these hidden stories, and bringing those stories from the margins to the center. And so I've really come to understand that our traditional knowledge is what provides the foundation for archaeological research that is of benefit to our people and our communities. And so in the top two right-hand photos, the left-hand photo and the center photo, I'm in full field work mode for Navajo Nation, his Heritage and Historic Preservation Department. And so I did a lot of field work and learned from people in the community about what it meant to be in relation again, and what it meant to learn from the landscape. And so when I did archaeology on our homelands, I learned the most from the grandmas and the grandpas who I encountered in survey work, because they were the ones who took the time to take me to these different places on the landscape. They told me the stories, and they told me about their positionality, right? And who they were and how they related to these places, but also why it was important for their community and for us as Diné people. And so I learned more probably from the time that I was in the field with our Navajo people than my entire tenure within academia. And I understand that might not be possible for people, but when you're working with Indigenous peoples, you're working for them and by them, you learn from them. It's their knowledge, it's their life worlds, it's that sort of everything that they do when they're at home that will tell us what we need to do. those are the directions, those are the guidelines. That's what we need to center and to learn from, instead of centering Western academic sort of knowledge where that has nothing to do with who we are or where we come from. And so, in thinking about that and how it's impacted our own people, Navajo people, we have more than 30% of our homes with no running water or electricity still. And so when we think about how archaeology has been employed to study and provide the tenure and these pathways to success for non-Indigenous peoples, right? It hurts us all that more when we as Indigenous peoples have to go into our communities and we have to pay penance for those people who've come in before us. And my intention in becoming an archaeologist was to help my people. It was to utilize archaeology as a tool to support our own knowledges, to support our own practices in a way that they weren't seen as myth or superstition, but also that created futures that were from us and that were of us, right? And that is something that we have never been able to do in archaeology and anthropology. But I also see this in conservation work that I've been a part of. And so in some of the most recent work that I've done, I did a report with a colleague for the Wilderness Society, and they wanted to look at their history of working with tribal nations and how they have supported tribal nations. And I just kind of laughed and I said, well, I don't know if there's anything that we can cite, because according to conservationists, we are in the way of supporting this idea of pristine wilderness, right? We and our relationships with nature and our landscape and our environment are seen as being disruptive and of being sort of again disruptive of these like pristine natural processes. And so it sort of, these ideas exclude us and they push us away from these knowledge systems that we've had again since time immemorial, and that have been practiced and tested for thousands of years, because we are still here as Indigenous peoples. We utilize our knowledge and our songs, our offerings, our prayers as protocol in how we live with the environment. And so with these kinds of disruptive sciences that are coming into our lands and sort of being utilized to protect our landscapes, it's also pushing us away, and it's taking it, to me, it's taking away our authority and our relationship, that intimate relationship that we have with these lands. Again, because we have that knowledge that's been tried and true and tested for thousands of years. And so who better to understand and to implement this kind of way than Indigenous peoples themselves, right? And so, one of the things that in thinking about our landscape, and that's really helped us to start to protect our landscapes and protect our sacred places, is shifting the way that we talk about our land. And so I have two different maps here on this screen. And so these are both depictions of the Nehbekea or Navajo homelands. And so we have the map on the left-hand side that is a, topographic USGS map, probably the larger set, the 100,000 scale. But it shows the exterior boundaries of the Navajo Nation. It shows major cities, highways, or interstates. And the larger green mark there is sort of the limits of our Aboriginal homelands, if you will. And so we have our reservation, but we also recognize that the larger green areas being the lands that we had aboriginally traveled and utilized. And so if we look at the other map that we have displayed there, you'll see that there are some features that are familiar. So we sort of have like the north arrow. We have the exterior boundaries of the Navajo Nation. But what it's depicting is our cultural landscape. And so if you are not familiar with our philosophies or our foundational laws, this is something that's a little bit more difficult to understand. And so, as I said, we have the San Francisco Peaks that are our western boundary marker, but we have 6 sacred mountains that sort of delineate our sacred lands, but there are 4 that are our boundary markers. And so you'll see them, the Debensa, Cisnagini, and Tzotzil. Those are our other 4, are the other 3 sacred mountains. And so you'll see the rainbow that surrounds that. And again, that's the sort of boundaries of Dinetbekeya. You'll also see some of our deities. I always have to think about what that word is, the deities. And so the one that is on the left-hand screen is a depiction of Black Mesa. And so that is our one of our gods that is depicted there, but it's actually the location of Black Mesa, a major topographic location there within Navajo Nation. I spoke a little bit about that, and then the other one is the Chusca mountain ranges. And so again, a very different depiction of what we understand this landscape to be. And so our current Navajo Nation, though, as it is within the exterior boundaries, is made up of 17 million acres of land. And so the majority of our lands are trust lands, so they're held in trust by the federal government. But we also have fee lands, lands that we purchased, and then we have individual allotments that are in northwestern New Mexico that also coincidentally coincide with the land, the gas and oil extractive industry there in northwestern New Mexico. And so, what we see in the cultural map, those boundaries were implemented and solidified through the stories told by our elders and our people, but also through these ceremonies that have been conducted through generations of Navajo people. And so within these lands, right, we have our sacred places, but we also have our hunting and gathering places, we have our offering places, but also other significant places that relate to our ceremonial and ecological knowledges. And so those are depicted here as well. And so again, you see the difference between what we value and what's important to us to survive versus this sort of topographic, linear kind of map that you see on the left-hand side. But in thinking about what it is to when I say cultural landscape, right, for us as Navajo people, we have no distinction between our natural and cultural resources, right? It's all one and the same, and it's the same for landscape or cultural landscape, natural landscape. It's just the land, or Dinetbekeya, right? It's all the same thing to us. And so what I have here are examples of places that are protected under the Navajo Nation. And so we have our own site registry, but we were able to create a registry that has places that are important to us. And so again, we have these sort of mixed kinds of features that are a combination of natural elements, but that are offering places, right? So they're protected. We have our Nihitnasazi, or our ancestral sites, that are also protected. But we also have our cultural places, our ceremonial places, that are protected as well. And so the diagram that I have on the right-hand side is also a cultural understanding of our Navajo universe. And so when I say we have no distinction between our natural and our cultural environment or landscapes, this is what I mean. And that's what it looks like. So here in this map, we have our history presented, we have who we are now, and then we have like these links to our futures, right? And so again, when we think about, we conceptualize our environment, it's all one and the same. Our ancestors exist with us on the same plane as our future generations. There's no sort of distinction or like time sequence that separates us. We're all on the same, maybe it's more like this, we're all on the same. And so it continues to grow and to move. And so we might not touch, right? And we think about sort of that kind of whirlwind kind of structure. We may not touch, but we know we're in presence with one another, and we think about one another when we go through the land and when we make our decisions about how we care for our land and what's important to us on the landscape. And so we have a very holistic view of the environment that we inhabit. And so our kinship systems are extended to our environment as well. And so we have foundational laws that really have taught our people how to live within this landscape, or within Dinehpikea, since time immemorial. These foundational laws understand that we have, like I said, have these tried and true methods of how to survive and how to be in the land. And that's what's also represented here. This is our ceremony, our protocols, our songs and our prayers. All of that all exists in this one place. And when I think about how we view our environment and why it's so important for us to ensure that it's protected and that it exists for future generations, we see it from a very multi-dimensional perspective, right? Whereas we look at some of these maps and they're one-dimensional, it incorporates one sort of concept. Whereas we look at these kinds of maps, right? And this map here, it's multi-dimensional. There are so many different elements and dimensions that are a part of these maps and these understandings that are not captured in these sort of traditional understandings. When I say traditional, I mean like Western-based kinds of sciences. Make that as a note. Let's see. Okay, right. And so, when we think about our landscapes, right, and where we are now, this is a map from the Navajo Nation AML UMTRA abandoned mines and uranium mining and tailings remediation programs. Sorry, it's a huge name for our tribal department. But we see the impacts of settler colonialism on our lands, right? We look at this map here, and this is a map of literally all environmental destruction and degradation on our tribal lands. And so, when we hear about these things, we hear about the number of mines, the number of, uranium mines, tailing, remediation sites, coal mines, and it doesn't impact us. But when we look at it and see the impact here, as with this map, we realize that we are facing dire situations, right? That our communities, especially Indigenous communities, are faced with climate change at almost every single level and within every dimension of their lives. We see this from the destruction of our sacred places, number one, because that impacts our overall health and well-being. When we're not able to go and practice and have a ceremony or collect from these places, that impacts our overall health and well-being. But also, like just being able to survive and the lack of animals and water that exists on our lands, because with these extractive industries, they're also stealing our water. They're taking our water. So our springs are drying up. our natural waterways are drying up so that our animals have nowhere to go. Our people who still practice traditional farming methods, they are having extremely hard times in trying to figure out, how do I feed my family? How do I ensure that the knowledge that I was passed down and that I'm going to pass down succeed or survives, right? How do we maintain as Indigenous peoples when everything about us that makes us Indigenous is under threat and is being destroyed at an alarming pace? One of the things that I learned as an archaeologist from my people is that our land is our identity. Our language, our practices, our philosophy, our thoughts, our life worlds all come from the landscape. And when we have no land left, then we have no Dene, right? We have no Nimipu people. Who we are as a people is gone. And so, when we think about how we practice the, reciprocity or respect, right? We have to think about how we treat our landscape, because no matter what we think or how far removed we think we are, all of the actions that we make as an individual, that ripples and impacts everyone else. And so, that's one of the things that we hold very dear in our Navajo culture, is that even if we don't know one another, we're still connected. And my actions and my activities, they impact you and they will impact you. They might not impact you at the moment when I make that decision to do something, but they will continue. They will at some point impact you. And so I think that's something that we need to move and take forward with us, is that understanding of our individual actions do impact other people. And whether those are negative or positive impacts, they still impact other people. And so there's power in all of us at this individual level to change and to do something. Let's see, I think I might be going a little bit over here. So this map is a little bit, these are all of the abandoned uranium mines that exist on Navajo Nation. And so all of the mining that was conducted on Navajo lands was from outside entities. Although we did purchase the coal mine in Fruitland, but all of these other mining activities were all from non-tribal entities. And so the legacy of environmental degradation and extractive industries on Navajo lands literally coincides with these settler colonial forces that were levied against Indigenous peoples and their forced migration. And so, when we think about how Indigenous peoples were moved from their homelands and put into and pushed onto other homelands, right? That was intentional, with the intention being that they would open these lands up for settlers. These were settler lands to be sold and or used for extractive kinds of industries, right? And so, for example, our modern tribal government governance system was introduced as a way to extract tribal approval of oil and gas sales in northwestern New Mexico in 1924. And so our entire government was set up so that we could sign away our rights to our lands, so that these industries could come in and extract the gas, the oil, the minerals, whatever it was that we had. It was set up to do just that. And so, if we look at that sort of forced movement, that forced migration as well, we'll see that it coincides with these discoveries of these minerals. And so we see these coal mines, we see copper mines, we see uranium mines, and it's just wave after wave after wave of extractive forces. And so, this is a legacy that continues today. And it was something that I had to contend with as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. And just as an example, when I came on, we were reviewing the oil and gas leases in that allotment area in northwestern New Mexico. And I decided that I wasn't going to sign anything until I got a handle on what was happening in that area, because I had people coming from that area, from those communities, into my office, and they were telling me that they were sick, their families were sick, their animals were getting sick, and there was all of this machinery, there was all of this pollution that they were seeing on these allotments in the areas that they were living. And so I ended up having to take a few site visits out there, and I saw exactly all of those things that they were saying. And so I decided again to do a moratorium on signing those leases as a way to speak to communities, to find out what was happening through the BIA and through these other agencies, the BLM, for example, who were approving all of these leases. And so I wanted to do a thorough search and ensure that our sacred places were being protected. And it wasn't a full day hadn't even passed, and I got a call from the BIA, the BLM, and there was one other major federal agency that called me in the same day to sort of threaten me. And this needs to be taken care of, and we need to have these things signed. And I said, well, I appreciate that you need them signed, but we need to do our due diligence to ensure that our Navajo lands, our people, and our relatives, and our place is protected. And so we have the authority to do that, and we are going to take that time to do that. I'm sorry. And so, next thing I know, I get a call from the Navajo Nation president, and what's going on. I get all these calls from these people, and what's going on. And so I explained, well, I'm taking the time to investigate and to go talk to the people out there, and we need to figure out what's happening to our people. So I'm not signing anything until we get the full picture. Oh, okay, that's all I needed to hear. All right, keep doing what you need to. And so that was a little personal victory for me, and it was probably one of the best feelings outside of having my kids and getting my PhD, of being able to call the BIA and these other agencies and telling them, you're going to have to wait until I'm ready. And so, but that was one experience, right? And I can't even imagine how my other colleagues or how my other relatives are doing when these agencies are calling and harassing and threatening, right? And not even the agencies, but these other companies that are involved with us. And so when I speak about settler colonialism, it's that process of the government being involved with these other agencies, right? It's this whole system that has been implemented to take things, to extract and to push us aside as Indigenous peoples. And so that's something that we're actively fighting, right? Let's see, I'm going to actually skip that one. I don't want to talk about that a whole lot. So, I want to pull this back to archaeology. And one of the things that I've noticed is that in these discussions about the land and the environment, we borrow from anthropology and archaeology. And one of the things that I always caution people about is that in anthropology and archaeology in the early days, right, when these archaeologists and anthropologists first came to our lands, they came to our lands with the intention of pushing us off these lands and laying claim to these lands. And so the fact that they studied us, they defined us, they delineated our cultures, our spirituality, everything about us came from these early anthropologists and archaeologists, so that we became these very finely defined peoples, right? So much so that they enacted blood quantum on us as a way to say whether or not we are Native American or we are Indigenous. And so when we think about that, right, and we look at how climate change or how conservationism is sort of implemented, it's always with this colonial mindset of us being defined in a way that is easy to pull us out of the picture and to ignore us. And so there's this sort of tendency to displace us from any of these narratives. And so if we look at the way archaeology is written, we have these Paleo-Indian cultures that none of us as contemporary peoples are really connected to, right? There's this archaeological culture that's created as a way to, again, displace us from this deep time. But when we enact and implement Indigenous and ancestral knowledges about the past, we're pushing all of that aside and we're actively centering what it means to be a Navajo or a Hopi person, right? Or Zuni in our own lands. And so we're able to articulate how we came to understand this land. We're able to understand our own relationship and how to care for the land. And so when we indigenize, we are literally reclaiming that knowledge and that space. And that is something for me that's been very exciting in understanding how do we go forward, right? How do we address these large problems? And by being able to indigenize the way that we look at the landscape and the way that we tell these stories, we're recentering Indigenous knowledges, we're recentering Indigenous experiences so that they really are the authorities on their own homelands. Let's see. Okay, so I just want to end with a few sort of insights here in thinking about moving forward. And in my own experience, what I've noticed is that there's strength in tribal collectives, and so coming together in facing these huge issues is critical to our success, right? But also we have to understand that each of us and as nations has a very unique spatial temporal relationship with the environment and the landscape that predates these modern scientific and conservation enterprises, which are both very anti-Indigenous and contribute to the erasure of Indigenous peoples from the land by supporting these ideas of empty land or terra nullius, for example, right? But also there's a critical need for us to work with other tribal nations to address these issues. So yes, these sort of collectives are important, but it's also important to work with one another. So creating opportunities to pull in resources, to pull in governments, to pull in experts, right? That is critical in moving forward. And so in my own experience, we worked with Navajo Nation, worked with San Carlos Apache and the Pueblo of Laguna to basically sue the United States and their positioning and favoritism of extractive industries over Indigenous tribal nations. And so this photo here in the top left-hand corner is a perspective of the San Carlos Tipo and me as a Navajo Tipo facing the U.S. State Department when we were testifying at the UN. And so it was only two of us were allowed to sit there with our legal representatives. Meanwhile, across the table, there's the U.S. State Department with about 20 people on their team. And so anytime we were asked a question, or we asked a question, there was this sort of collective, like, huddling and whispering, and then they would ask a question back to us. And it was a really strange experience, but also it was something that I could imagine my own ancestors being a part of when they were, traveling as delegations to Washington to plead and to ask for this assistance or for our rights, right? To advocate for our rights. But also, there's a need for us to learn from other tribal nations and other indigenous nations. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is reach out to the folks that I know in the Northwest. And so the photo here in the very bottom is I have a friend at University of Washington who brought together a consortium of archaeologists and tribal historic preservation officers at the University of Washington, and we're able to learn from one another, tell our stories, and that was the sort of that moment of, this is what we need. We need to be able to come together and to share knowledge with one another in order to overcome some of these issues. But looking at a larger level, right, there's also the strength in international Indigenous collectives. And so learning together, we learn the most when we learn with and from each other. And so I saw this practice firsthand when I took students to Australia and New Zealand and learned about their efforts in protecting their sacred places and also in protecting the environment. And there's, again, this same issue of settler colonialism and the displacement of Indigenous peoples from their homelands. And it was very interesting to learn about, their push for the reintroduction of these cultural practices to protect the landscape. And I think we all saw this with the fires in Sydney, and it was literally those Aboriginal groups that saved Sydney by doing cultural burning around these areas. And there was evidence of the cultural burning that saved their own communities, where in neighboring communities where there wasn't cultural burning, that they burned to the ground. And so it was at that sort of extreme level that the communities there, that the settler colonial government accepted that, yes, these Indigenous peoples know their landscape, and we need to allow them that time and that space to take care of the landscape. And so for me, that was, I think, it was a bittersweet moment for a lot of us as Indigenous folks, was to see how our knowledge, our ancestral, our cultural knowledge saved these peoples, these lands, right, these animals. And it was shown to the world. And, we all have these stories about how our knowledge is going to be the knowledge that saves us and that saves our world. And so I think we are finally, sadly, at that point where it's our knowledge that is coming in to save us as human beings. And so, it's up to us to learn how to and to be able to center that knowledge and to bring it into these academic spaces where we can really work together and honor one another and actively contribute to saving our landscapes and to saving one another. And so, in thinking about how we move forward together, it is together. We learn from each other, and we go through the good and the bad together. That's how we're going to be able to at least start to address some of these impacts. And so, we're all in this together, and that's how we have to address a lot of these issues is together. So thank you, Asheha and Katiao, for the time and the attention. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ora. That was terrific. I was taking notes like crazy. And I'm sure that folks who are listening probably have some questions and comments of their own. So I want to encourage our audience to put their questions into the chat. Meanwhile, we are going to hear from James. And after James, we will be able to open it up for some discussion. So, James.
Well, thank you, and really great to be here. And I always appreciate of student organizations that reach out to Indigenous people and invite us to their meetings and invite us to their conferences. And so I take a special interest in presenting the work that I'm a part of, but also listening and learning from others. And I really appreciate Ora, what a presentation. That was tremendous. And so today I want to talk about this title of my talk here, I guess, is This Is Our Home, a Travel Perspective on Geoheritage and Climate and a Changing Climate. And so I come from the Rosebud Sioux tribe, Lakota, and also let me introduce myself in my own language, and I would say Le Ampeduki Lela Washdelo Yanke Chanku James Rattling Fimachapi Nasi Changa Lakota Yate Yuhan Chante Washe Nafechi Zapalo. I greet you from my heart with a handshake, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. And what an opportunity to share and to be a part of an important conversation like tribes, Indigenous knowledge, and climate change. And also thank you to the organizers, Shasta and Curti, and your whole team. It's cold here where I'm at. It's 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And I wish I was in California with you guys. But nevertheless, we're here, and so let's proceed. I was asked to talk about some of the work we're doing on Rosebud, my tribe, and so I'm sharing this letter, this memorandum that was established, something called the Rosebud Sioux Tribe Climate Crises Working Group. And in that group, I was asked to join it. I am a tribal member, but I don't work for the tribe. And so I was asked to join this, and this is a letter that started the process to begin getting support from the tribe. And so with that became a resolution. So as for tribal governments, we have our own ways of making decisions formally. So this is a resolution establishing the Tribal Climate Change Working Group. And in that, again, the goals of the working group is to create and develop a plan, develop strategies and actions for addressing a changing climate. And so we were able to secure funding from the Bureau of Indian Affairs Climate Resilience Program to do this work. Also, we wanted to look at assessment and how we work with those kind of tools to understand how and what's happening on our landscapes in regard to climate, how we work with the community, the 20 communities that comprise our tribe on the Rosebud. We wanted to develop an adaptation plan. I know that's been a lot of effort, a lot of work done among tribes, and my good friend Mike Durgalo from Salish Kootenai, they've done a great plan. So we were looking and learning from them as well as they did that. I think it's important that we were learning that our community really didn't understand what was talked about in terms of climate change, the whole lexicon of climate change and those things. So we had to work on how do we communicate what we're trying to do with the communities in a good way. And finally, we looked at developing a center, some kind of a focus area, a place, a space and a place where we could go deeper into the issues of climate change. So whether that's science, whether that's research, education, communication, we wanted to really look at and build something from the ground up and do that in partnership. And so, we tried to connect again and sort of communicate strategy with our past, with our ancestors. So this is what they call a winter count, and it's drawn on a buffalo hide. And this was how our ancestors communicated and shared and stored information about important events through the years. And so there was a person who was responsible for drawing and archiving and putting this information together so that the tribe had a history, had information on what were the most important events. And so in this work with climate work, we wanted to talk about data. So data is a big part of climate change adaptation. And so we wanted to look at what's that look like for us? What's our understanding of data? How do we use data in our own way? And so in that, we began to look at collecting stories, and I really appreciate oral tradition. And so some of these stories were documented, were written down. So this is a story about water. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I just want you to know that we've been collecting these stories that's been done, that's been shared through our elders, But again, it's a reminder to us, again, as tribal people, that oral histories is a very important part of transmission. And we don't want to replace that or displace that with the written language, but we want to honor and respect oral language, because I think there's great value still yet today to practice and use oral traditions. So again, this is the continuous story. And I think that when we think about these things, we're trying to figure out how we collect these stories, how do we archive them, and how do we share them, which means that we have to have a policy. I'm really glad that the discussion is not just around science or culture, but it's also about policy, about how those things are set up, they're in place now, but how do we build and develop policy really to inform the work that we're doing? How do we protect also these stories in a way that is meaningful to us? And so we've been pushing something called the Tribal Data Sovereignty Initiative. So we've been asking these questions of ourselves and others. I get a chance to speak in different venues. And so I start the slide, I show this slide because I want people to understand that we're also thinking about how we rebuild our nations. We're also trying to understand how do we collect data on our people, for our people, and how does that also work with third parties? We're always seeking opportunities and understanding challenges in terms of collecting data. And what's that look like in terms of data governance, which I think is an important term. It's an important process of how do we govern, how's our tribal government govern using data. I think the idea of community of practice is a kind of a buzzword in a way, but we want to learn from other tribes and other indigenous people around the world and how they're working with data, how they're using it for decision making. And so part of my work on the working group, but also in my work with the University of Colorado Boulder, so I do get to speak, and I get to be part of efforts like this, where I speak to audiences about things that we're working on. And so there is an element of this work of sharing and attending and coming to the table, coming to conferences and showing up and speaking to the things that we're working on that are important to us as well. And what's exciting, I think, also is that, there are things happening in Indian country. We know that. So one of the things that I get to be part of is something called the Ocheti Shankoi. We got a redevelopment, reestablishment, rebuilding this whole original Ocheti Shankoi means seven council fires. And so it's really building this regional effort, 17 plus tribes part of this. And so we've been working for past years, really trying to define what we're going to do for this. So this is it's kind of like a logic model, but it kind of outlines some of the things that we're looking at, thinking about. We've been meeting now for 2 years to try to formalize this words, formalize the actions, and really come up with, and really thinking about what a modern day tribal confederation would look like. And how do we do that? How do we stay true to our traditions, but also knowing that we live in another world, it's kind of a different world, and how does it all fit together? And how do we work across tribal boundaries and where we're set at now geographically as tribes, again, with our land base and such? But we address health, wellness, land, culture, language, all the things that comprise of a nation. So just gives you an example again of the things that we're doing in the Northern Great Plains. And the importance of the work is that through a regional effort, we may be able to better support each other and begin to think about other kinds of initiatives. What can we do economically? How do we build economic development initiatives that help us? How do we build a internet technology infrastructure that supports access to broadband, access to training, so that students and young people can access the internet? And so the pandemic really demonstrated to us that we have some vulnerabilities in this area. When our students had to go home and couldn't go to school, and had to get on Zoom, with a computer, a lot of those families did not have that technology. So it's a justice issue, it's an equity issue, and so we need to figure out how to address that. And so maybe this Ocheti Shankoi can be one of the layers, if you will, a horizontal leadership structure that can support those great efforts. And so that's another effort that we're part of, and I think it's interesting. Well, also, I just share this slide because I know I've been part of some of these gatherings and what we're thinking about in terms of how we talk about climate. So you have something called the Natural Law Conference, Omni, protecting water, land, air, and environment through sovereignty, addressing the Green New Deal and climate change. Then the middle one is what I've been talking about earlier about developing this regional, I heard the word collective tonight, but this regional entity, really building upon the sovereignty of tribal nations. And finally, the Wind River Climate Summit, really a youth-led effort that I got to be a part of last year, and it was great to see tribal young people talk about climate. And in a lot of ways, they're fearless in terms of ideas, and so we go there to support them. We go to understand what they're thinking, and then hopefully we come up with some good things to do from those kind of gatherings. But again, there are things happening in our country that are dealing with climate, and so we've been a part of these things. Again, food sovereignty is another one that you've heard probably about, and so our tribe, again, the Sioux tribe, is working, developing farms, developing food within the community to help look at what we normally eat, but also our traditional food. And so we know that climate change is going to change. It's going to change our food regime. It's going to affect our soils. It's already affecting our water supply. And so we have a lot of things to do, but it's important that we begin to build capacity within our communities to understand the importance of food, of healthy food, and how it's needed really to build strong nations. Another effort on Rosebud, again, is reestablishment, restoring the buffalo to our lands. And I know there's a colonial aspect to this effort today, and so it's really about the conflict we have between cattle industry on our reservation, and really the power of those cattle people, if you will, that industry, and how it holds the majority of land leases on our reservation in terms of our land tenure system. So we have big issues in terms of how many of those families really control the land base on our reservation, which is approximately 2 million acres. And so if we have a good idea, like talking about reestablishing buffalo, if you know the conflict between buffalo and cattle about brucellosis, so then you have an overview of the land. You have native producers, cattle producers, and then you have others who want to bring back the Tatanka or buffalo to our lands because we feel this is better for us. It's better for our land. It's reconnecting us to our culture. So those sort of things are also happening. Again, this idea of regeneration of indigenous ecosystems. Also, energy is part of that important energy, water, food nexus. And so our tribe, we're one of the first tribes to put on a big wind turbine there in our reservation, supplying our casino. But again, it's been a long time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of money going into these things. But again, we've been working to get that. And how do we build that? Work with smaller sizes, smaller grid systems at the housing community level, but also at the individual house. Part of my work, and I'm glad I talked about an Indigenous collaboration. So for 2 years, I was asked to give our intervention of part of our U.S. government to a meeting called the Group on Earth Observations. And there I met other Indigenous people who are working in the same space, trying to protect their cultural heritage in a changing climate, utilizing Earth observation, data science, and technology. So it was a tremendous experience for me. And so what came out of that was really this establishment of an alliance and beginning to work on what do we do together to support each other? How do we build a workforce? How do we address our cultural heritage, and what can we learn and share with other Indigenous people about them dealing with climate? And so the core group is they're from Africa, from the Amazon, from New Zealand, and from Australia. And so we continue to work and collaborate the last 2 years, and it's been a real honor for me to represent my tribe. So I took my tribal flag there to Canberra, Australia. It was such a thing to be a part of that, to bring our flag there with other flags, and as a demonstration of our own tribal sovereignty and self-determination. And so, we spoke some Indigenous languages today, Navajo and Nipu, and also Lakota. And I do think that part of our decolonization effort is to reestablish our languages among all our people. And so the Lakota people have been working really hard, very diligently in trying to reestablish our language and how we teach that, how we bring it into our schools, how do we honor and respect our original fluent first language people. And so the pandemic, again, demonstrated our vulnerability. A lot of our elders who were fluent, grew up with the language, they passed on. And so there's really a dire, I would say use the word dire. There's really a great concern among our culture that these original first language people, our elders, our knowledge holders are very vulnerable to the pandemic and still are. And how do we protect them? And one of the things that we did in national news in America was that one of the first people to be vaccinated against the pandemic were our elders, especially our knowledge holders. So somehow that made the news. But that's an example again, I think, of how we're sort of doing things what we think we need to do. And I'm really thankful for our leaders and our tribal governments and such. I criticize our tribal government as well. I critique it, but I also know that that's our form of government right now. It doesn't mean we're going to always have that one, but it's our form of government right now. We have leaders working hard every day to do what needs to be done and to continue to move our tribe forward. And so I think, when we talk about how do we do this work, how do we bring two knowledge systems together? I've been working with this idea called ethical space, and it's really about a place for and to work with different knowledges. As the introduction, I was mentioning that I do work in a Western Science organization at SDSU. I also work with my tribe, my tribal college, and so there's a traditional knowledge aspect to this. And so we want to find and work on better ways to interact and to talk to each other, dialogue, and to really begin to promote the idea that all knowledge systems are equal, and that not one system has more weight or legitimacy than the other. Finally, one system does not need to collaborate to achieve validity, internal validity. So we're beginning to do workshops and begin to roll this idea out here, working with organizations in America. And so we have our first workshop dealing with ethical space, two-eyed seeing, and also the Wolakota concept. And we're really excited about it. We're working with 25 conservation scientists. Some of them are leading conservation organizations who are part of this workshop. And we're going to have, I think, a good time of 3 days of training, interacting, of dialogue, and really trying to push, again, how do we work together in more effective ways? As I wrap up here, I just want to promote this next big gathering we're having, Makasi Tomini, our interconnecting Earth. So we're having a summit, if you will, in Rapid City, May 17th, 18th, and 19th. And so I get to be a part of this effort as well, bringing together the tribes and our partners to talk about these great and important issues of youth, treaty rights, food, energy, and water, and even the role of science again, and trying to think about how we might advance these good ideas, but also beginning to build those partnerships and what's needed and what's necessary for us to prepare. We're already in climate change, and so what do we do now is the question. And as tribes, as was mentioned earlier, that we do have the knowledge, the understanding, the wisdom, really to provide solutions and path forward. But there's still barriers to get there, and barriers as politics and colonization and some of those old structures yet that we still need to take down. So you're welcome to that. There will be a virtual component to this, so you're welcome to connect to that, and I'll be willing to share that at a later date with you, with Corey and others. And so I do respect a lot of people who helped me get to where I am today, and one of them is Dave Whitehead, one of our elders in Rosebud, and he talks really about the need to communicate with creation, and he's advising all of us, including young people, to reconnect with the land, reconnect with our relatives, and that talking about saving grandmother Earth again and to reattach. So I do think that there's efforts that needed for us to reestablish. All of us need to reestablish our relationship to the land again. And those that have that, we need to strengthen that, and we need to figure out how to teach that, how to transfer that, how to work with people who are still have not had that background. A lot of our people don't have that background. They grew up in different ways. So we need to make that available to them. And finally, he's admonishing us not to wait. It's good to do these things, and it'll help us. So with that, I'll stop there and say, thank you all very much, and all my relations. So back to you, Shasta.
Thanks, James. Just between the two of you, I'm overwhelmed with thoughts and ideas and questions, and I know I'm not speaking just for myself, because I was looking at the rest of us that are on camera and just seeing a couple times Giorgio was nodding so hard I thought his head was going to fly off. So there's obviously a lot of, I'm sorry, Giorgio, I have to take my shots where I can get them. A lot to talk about, but before, and we do have one question that's been waiting from the beginning from our audience. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask that question, but then I want to give an opportunity to our speakers from yesterday and our upcoming speakers for tomorrow to also join in, because it would be great to have a dialogue. But this question comes from Kurt Dungoski, who I know and work with, and who Edward, of course, knows. He's the Zuni Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, but he brings up the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples from the United Nations, so the UNDRIP. And he's asking, how is UNDRIP applicable for addressing the settler states' responsibility for the negative effects of climate change? And you both, I think, were brought up the idea of the broader global community and their responsibilities. So, Ora or James, either one, if you want to tackle that one.
Well, go ahead, Ora, and I'll follow you.
Yeah, definitely. So, I most of what I sort of speak about is definitely archaeology centered, heritage centered. And so, I was looking actually at the actual UNDRIP. And so for me, I always go right to like Article 12 and 13, 14, right, where it speaks about Indigenous peoples having the right to manifest, practice, develop, and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, right? And so one of the things that I see in that is that, like I said, we don't have a distinction between the way that we see our natural environment and our cultural environment. And so, you know, it is a right that we have to maintain our way of life, but it's also a right for us to maintain who we are. And again, I said that our identity, everything about us is the land. And so for me, in connecting these two things, it's utilizing this as a sort of legal kind of, I don't know if it's a mandate or guidelines or what it would be, because I understand some of the nuances with the United States not signing and but in thinking about it, right, we have the right to self-determination, we have the right to sovereignty. And so in applying these kinds of rights, it supports everything that we're doing to protect our landscape, to protect our way of life, to protect our future generations. But also, again, both of us spoke about these kind of foundational laws, right? And all of us, I would assume, as Indigenous peoples, have these kinds of foundational laws, or that kind of knowledge that is the base of everything, of who we are and how we practice and how we move in this earth. And so we have that right as peoples. And furthermore, we have a responsibility to care for these lifeways or these relationships, these connections, whatever you want to call them, right? And that is all a part of what the UNDRIP actually is. It's saying that Indigenous peoples have the right to live, they have the right to be, they have the right to practice, they have the right to access. And all of those things are connected to the environment and how we engage with, how we learn from, how we protect the environment. And so, I know there's a lot there that goes into it, but I think for me, those are some of the very sort of baseline things, and I think one of the other things is that, right, we have the right to control, we have the right to ensure that these knowledges are perpetuated to future generations. And that right there is key for me, because it's, I think something that James said is that our youth are fearless, and that's true. Our youth they didn't live in the same conditions. They don't understand what it means to be like a BIA native, right? Or to be fearful of the BIA or these other federal kinds of agencies. They have that fire in us that has moved through each generations. They have that blood memory in them to do that work. And so in invoking the UNDRIP, right, it's our youth that are going to be able to leverage these kinds of documents to create our own documents. I think is something that we've seen that's effective for us, is managing our own homelands, but then extending that to our Aboriginal territories and homelands, right? So yeah, I hope that helped her, Kurt, and yeah.
Well,
And James, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was just going to say, I think as a follow-up, I know a couple of days ago, I was asked to respond to an article regarding nature-based solutions. We probably heard that before from a global level. We heard that at, I think, at COP26, and I was part of the ICUN, the International Congress of Conservation. And so this thing started making its rounds in those big meetings, nature-based solutions. And so I countered, I said, we need indigenous-based solutions. But that acronym doesn't, IBS, I guess that's irritable bowel syndrome. And so people said, don't do IBS, James, figure out a better acronym. So you got to be careful of how you put together acronyms, because people look at it differently. But in all seriousness, I think I would agree with Ora and her thoughts on UNDRIP, and I do think that it's a beginning of a framework, on how to understand who we are as Indigenous people, asserting our sovereignty and our rights and self-determination. And it took a lot of work for our people before us to put those together. And so I'm always before I critique anything like that, I'm always trying to be careful to understand the context, the history of how those major efforts been put together. Because I know as I begin to learn international work, it takes a long time to do that. And obviously the diversity of Indigenous people. So I don't know how they all got to agree on those things, but I know that we have to pay attention to those founding principles. And I think they're helpful as we begin to work, and as I work with others who are non-Indigenous, to understand what we really care about, what really matters to us, and why it matters. And I think increasingly, if we're seen as part of the solution, if you will, in terms of climate change and biodiversity, we need to really look at the implementation of UNDRIP and some of those other major important policy statements and work that's been done before. So I always applaud those guys who did that, men and women who worked hard to do that, to put together UNDRIP and others. And I think it's a beginning. And as Indigenous people, I think we need to get involved, and we need to participate in meetings like COP26 and ICUN, and get involved and encourage our people and our young people to get involved. I mean, Greta Thunberg, how did Greta Thunberg become Greta Thunberg? It takes, that sort of courage to go to those kind of meetings. And I think we need sort of a cadre, a cohort of Indigenous young people, articulate and cultural based, to speak to these things and to figure out what's next beyond UNDRIP to support the work that needs to be done. So thank you.
Well, Edward, I saw that you unmuted yourself, so I was wondering if you had something you wanted to add.
I do. Well, the UNDRIP was adopted in 2007, and shortly thereafter, Evo Morales of Bolivia, he made it their national law. And but of course, you know what happened to him in his presidency a couple of years ago. So we continue to see a rocky road as Indigenous peoples, in spite of the UN DRIP. There's still a lot of work to be done. And the reason why I say that is that many of our tribal nations have not acknowledged or invoked the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. My Ashui Nation has not acknowledged it or even began to think about invoking it. It's very critical that we do. And but of course, that's going to require another time where I can talk about where we can go with it. But it doesn't make sense to talk about it when our tribe is really not that conscious. In terms of where it's at the forum, we will be having a forum in April and May this year, and the forum has changed in compared to the last 10 years, for example. We were welcomed. There was really an open space in the main room, the general auditorium. And but in the recent years, one, because there was renovation going on at the General Assembly Hall, and so we weren't allowed that space. But thereafter, we're given the space, but we're not privy to it as much. And so since the adoption of the UN DRIP, there has been a lot of interventions submitted. And there has been a lot of very good interventions coming to a table and presentations. And I guess maybe it's an overwhelming process that we really don't hear back where all these interventions are going, but there have been very articulate individuals attending the permanent forum and speaking. And again, the nation states are not quite ready. They're not quite open to entertaining a conversation. You know, just to give you an idea, when the UN DRIP was adopted in 2007, US was reluctant to sign. So was Canada, so was New Zealand and Australia. And these were the nations that had the largest indigenous peoples populations. And so from the get-go, there was a lot of reluctance. And taking a step further, those individuals, those circles that were involved in drafting the declaration, a lot of really detailed and articulated needs were in the original draft documents. But during the negotiations with the nation states, a lot of it was watered down. And even after US signed on, it wasn't accepted wholly. For example, with the US said, basically said, if it doesn't contradict our present laws. And so the UN DRIP wasn't accepted and adopted and signed off with its own original intent. And so really in the process, it lost its integrity, it lost its strength, but nonetheless, we have to be grateful that it was adopted and signed off by all the nation states, the US, for example, and Canada. Early in the conversation, when I got invited from the San Diego State University, this forum, my comment was that we need to involve maybe organizations or a representative from the forum, for example, maybe the chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, to give us an update on where everything's at, because again, it's become quiet, and the pandemic didn't help. And so I guess on a pragmatic level, I would talk about my tribe. I would talk about the need for training, to provide training on a regular basis to our tribal people, and so we can get them acclimated. The last time I was at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, I think was 2018 or 19. I can't remember, or I think I was there both years. But what we heard on the floor of our convening was that after the what do they call the secretary to the United Nations, the rep from Canada talked about how the government was providing training to their agencies. And when that was said and done, Indigenous peoples from Canada, they said that's not true. They said the government is not providing the training, the necessary training. And so therefore, the UN DRIP is not benefiting Indigenous peoples that have invoked the UN DRIP. And it was similar in the US, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, some of the agencies in the course of the years, when the UN DRIP is brought up in meetings, in consultations, the government officials say that they're not really aware, they haven't gone through a formal training. And so that says that the nations, like for example, Canada and US, are not providing the agencies the necessary training. So I will leave you at that. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, that's this could be an entire forum just by itself on the UN DRIP and some of the limitations. And what all of you have answered or talked about has made me think about something that Ora brought up, which was this concept of pristine wilderness. And then you and James both talked about how the natural environment and cultural environment are one and the same. No, they can't be separated. And yet we find that that pristine wilderness idea still is the one, a wilderness without any sort of human interaction or effect. And even yesterday, Tino talking about the forests that people don't know better than to think these are natural forests, but they're actually monocultures. They're timber forests owned by paper companies and lumber companies that aren't really natural at all. So how do we talk about that and help people understand that there is no separation between the environment and culture? And, Ora, yeah, go ahead, Edward.
I have to comment on that. When I was at UNM, God, I can't remember, so many years ago, but during the summer break, I told my brother and I were going to school together. So I told my brother, I said, I don't want to be in a town. I don't want to be in Albuquerque. I don't want to be in a building. I want to be working outside. There was an opportunity to plant trees around Mormon Lake near Flagstaff, Arizona. And so there was a couple of teams that were out there planting trees, and I really made a lot of money. I think the first week I made $21. So, but few years later, I had the privilege of sitting down with Michael Coppotti. He was an artist, Hopi, well-known artist in the Flagstaff area. Unfortunately, we lost him to the N1. I can't remember what that virus was. Anyway, he was one of the victims that fell to that virus. But when I had dinner with him, I was so excited. I was telling him about Mormon Lake and how we plant the trees, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've seen that wilderness. You go down there and you look, and all the trees are in straight lines." And I said, "Okay, I got it." so anyway, I'll leave you with that. So
Agreed. And by the way, I went to UNM, and so I know Albuquerque, and yeah, outside is better. So, Ora, what are your thoughts about how do we help people understand that these things are not separate?
Yeah, I think it's this, right? Like having Indigenous peoples telling their own stories and sharing that kind of knowledge. I know in a lot of the presentations that I give, I always have to start out with that sort of contextual information just so people can keep up with what I'm trying to share. And one of the things that we don't have a space for in these kind of academic scientific spaces is storytelling. And so and honoring storytellers, and that's something that all of our cultures, all of our tribal Indigenous nations, they all have in common, is we all have storytellers, and that's something that's held and revered, and that's the way we're here still, right? Like that's how we share and perpetuate our cultural knowledge is through our stories. And so for me, it's this connecting our knowledge keepers with our youth. That intergenerational learning, that's important. I keep coming back to this idea about our youth are fearless, and again, they're going to lead us. They don't have the same kind of fear that was embedded in some of us, in some of the older generations, and more so for my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation than for my generation. But there's still a sense there of this kind of fear, and now we're raising these protectors and warriors, and they're our future, right? They're that seventh generation. And so for me, it's them. My hope is in the future, and what better place to share this knowledge than amongst grad students or undergrad students? These are the future practitioners. They're going to be the ones that are going to go into the field to do this work. And so, I had my time in the field. I had my time as a student, and now I'm teaching. I'm at that point where I can share my own knowledge and what was given to me from my community and from my own family. That's what I can offer. And it's through stories, right? And no matter how people try to frame it, right, these academics, they're storytellers, whether they want to admit it or not. Tenure is storytelling. And so we have to kick this idea that storytelling has no place in academia, because we all are. So
yeah, for sure. You hear that, students? That this is your call to action. And actually, real quick, I'm going to let Giorgio bust in here because he wanted to add something on that note.
Yeah, I think pulling off what James, Ora, and Edward have talked about, I think a really important point going back to the UN DRIP and what Ora said about grad students, and what yesterday Tino was saying, the university system is both the disease and the cure. And I think something we need to consider with UN DRIP, and this was actually a project I was working on with Ora and for Ora and Navajo Nation, I asked someone heading up the National Environmental Policy Act process about UNDRIP and what their perspective was on it. And they said, well, the agency would say, thank you for bringing it to our attention. That doesn't apply to us. So I think we really need to ask, what is a right? And is a right really a right if it can't be enforced? And what is a law? And if the law is not living, and if the law is not enacted, does it really matter? And the reason I raise this, and it goes back to what Ora talked about, in sort of the worldview system, how each one of us, there's a micro politics, each one of us can make a difference and has effects and affects on other people. These future students that are here, that put this together, you're going to be at the universities, and or you're going to be working for the governmental agencies, and or you're going to be working for the private industry. And we're all liminal spaces. And what I mean by that is what we allow to pass through us can either be transformative or reproducing this marginalization, this dispossession, this containment and erasure of Indigenous peoples that have happened since colonial settlers have stepped on these lands. And these are choices we need to make. Are we going to become worthy? Are we going to become brave? Are we going to decenter and lose ourselves in trying to understand these different worldviews, value systems, and relationships? Or are we going to keep going on with these epistemological errors that we've seen have brought to us climate change, and that are bringing everybody to these intensive impacts that are doing nothing for anybody in a beneficial way? Even those thinking they're profiting, in the end, they're going to the same place. So I just wanted to bring that context.
Thanks, Giorgio. And James, I'm gonna somewhat rephrase the question for you a little bit. And it is still about how do we help people understand that we are all connected. And so what is your encouragement for our audience, and just in general for becoming protectors and keeping that bravery in the face of these challenges?
Well, I think I sort of want to comment on what was said about academics and
yeah.
So I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado today, and I gave a talk this morning to the Society of Ecological Restoration, and really for the first time in the history of that group and other groups, Indigenous people began the conference. We started the conference, and we had a panel from all over the country, and I was given the honor to give the keynote. And one of the things I said to academics, and if you know me, I can be a little facetious, but I said, the world has problems, and universities have departments. And it's not my quote, but I love it because, it seems like sometimes the discourse is dominated by the academics when it comes to climate. It's all about climate data, climate science, climate modeling, and yet we know that it's not enough. If we had all this stuff, yet we can't still make decisions to turn this around. So I would say that what's interesting as well is, so I do a lot of consulting work, and I work with different organizations trying to build effective partnership with Indigenous people. And one of the groups I'm working with is tourism. So tourism is an opportunity where now the pandemic is kind of slowing down, if you will, but people are traveling again. And I live in South Dakota, and so we're $1 billion tourism, like New Mexico, $1 billion industry, right? People come, they want to see the Black Hills, they walk all over the place, and they have interested in travel cultures as well. And one of the things that they told us this year is that the whole wellness industry is just going to blow up. It's just going to go bananas, bazonkers, because people are still having to deal with the pandemic. And I would say that, in one way, one strategy is to be reconciled to the land. There's a reason why people come to the Black Hills. They may not know it or understand it, but there's a reason why they come. Just like build it, remember they were all going to the baseball field in Iowa. They had no idea why they're coming, but they are coming. And I think that, for our landscape and our history in the Black Hills, a very sacred place, though it's being challenged by these forest management policies and things like that, they still come. So I do think that, there needs to be a reconciliation to the land, how that goes about. And obviously, I think Indigenous people in this country have an important role, maybe to be guides, maybe to be mentors, but that's up to the tribal person, right? I'm not going to say we all need to do that. And I think so. Those are things I think about a lot lately, because we have to create those ethical spaces where we can have those conversations. Again, I was in a meeting today, and one young man came up to me, a non-Indigenous guy came up to me. I can tell he had a hard time with my talk, and he disagreed with me. And I said, that's fine, but we have to learn how to talk to each other, even if we disagree with each other. And so when we don't agree with each other, then we're digital. Somebody said we're digital, we're diverse, and we're divided. That's our reality right now. And so we're so far apart on all these ideas of how we reconcile to the land, how we teach each other about these things. But I do think that, to your credit, Corey, and all your group here, you guys are bringing the conversation together and bringing it in front of us. And the technology we have today now through Zoom and through these things, we have a platform. It's not the ideal platform, but I think it could be useful in some way. Finally, I would say is, we're at a really important point in the history of our tribal nation, especially in Lakota country, and we have so many challenges. But yet, every summer we have thousands of people come to South Dakota to practice and be with us in our ceremonial season. And so there's something happening in those times. Lakota people are very open in sharing those sort of things, whereas other tribes maybe not be, but we are. And so, we have to, use those times, I think, really to remind ourselves. And I talk about like the 4 R's, we have to promote responsibility. All of us have it. We've got to promote reciprocity. What we give and what we take, we have to give back. I always promote relationality as well. To be a good relative is to be a good Lakota. To be a good relative is to be a good Lakota. That means to relative to all things. And finally, I think that, we have to think about relevance. The things that we do together, it's got to be relevant to us going forward. So those would be my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And that actually takes us almost to our final few minutes here. And I wish we had more time for this conversation, but I invite everybody to come back tomorrow, all of our panelists, and we can hopefully round it out after our final 2 speakers to have this more of this conversation. I know I'm feeling inspired and encouraged, even though I do feel a little bit guilty about being an anthropologist. But Ora, I will say that this is an example of how things can change. Anthropology started as a colonial discipline, and now there are more people who are recognizing it as a way to work together to bring these ideas forward in a way that helps people understand how we are all connected. So I'm just going to give this last minute back to Corey so she can close us out.
Well, thank you, Shasta. And we first want to say thank you so much to Ora and James for being here tonight, giving amazing presentations. And as a student, I know that it is so important to take these stories, to take these knowledges, to really transform the way that we think and to transform our own disciplines. That's kind of what I'm challenged to do, listening to everyone speak tonight and who spoke yesterday. And I'm excited to be challenged even more tomorrow night. We also thank Adam. We thank Michael, Valentino, and Edward, who were panelists yesterday and who are panelists tomorrow, for being here as well and engaging in these conversations. And of course, Shasta and Giorgio, who moderated today. We're looking forward to our final climate talk tomorrow, kind of as Shasta has mentioned. We hope that these conversations will continue and we'll have more time to discuss them, but we'll end here tonight. Again, we are recording these sessions, so if you can't make it tomorrow, or if you missed yesterday, at the end of the talk tomorrow, we're going to put together a post-event newsletter and send that out to all of the participants. So all of the information will be shared. We'll also put updates on our webpage as well, so you can check that out. Well, we hope everyone has a good rest of their night. Good night.